One Piece anime works on a level few stories ever reach, because at its core is Monkey D. Luffy, a protagonist who is great not because he is complex in the traditional sense, but because he is uncompromisingly sincere in a world that constantly tries to crush sincerity. And that sincerity becomes the emotional anchor that makes One Piece anime backstories some of the most powerful in anime history.
And why they mattered so much. Before we even jump into the first arc of the show, one thing I want to compliment One Piece on is how strong its intro was. From just the intro alone, the premise for this entire show is already interesting. We're told the tale of a mysterious pirate named Gold Roger, who obtained all the wealth, fame, and power in the world, which declared him king of the pirates. However, on his execution day, he declared that all his treasure was hidden somewhere in a place called the Grand Line for anyone to go find. This speech sparked an entire fleet of pirates to begin their journey called the Great Pirate Era, where presumably our story begins as well. Then an absolute banger plays. This intro alone already kicks off the world-building possibilities this show might have and leaves you with so many questions. Who is Gold Roger and why was he killed? What was included in his treasure? And what is the Grand Line? With these questions in mind, we begin our first arc, Romance Dawn. In my opinion, Romance Dawn does a really good job at setting the premise of the show and introducing its core characters. We first meet our fearless rubber boy leader, Monkey D. Luffy. It immediately starts with one of the most fitting main character introductions of all time.
Luffy doesn't dominate the narrative by monologuing about his trauma or explaining his philosophy. He dominates it by how he reacts to the pain of others, by what he refuses to tolerate, and by the absolute clarity of his values, which makes every backstory feel less like exposition and more like a moral indictment of the world that created it.
We see Luffy explode out of a barrel on a random ship and scream about how great of a nap he just had and how hungry he is. Luffy also meets a dorky kid stuck on a pirate crew here named Kobe and casually tells him he's gonna become king of the pirates, even if it means dying for it. In just that one conversation, Luffy's conviction towards his dream snaps Kobe out of his fear and pushes him to stand up to Alvida and chase his own dreams of becoming a Marine. Within a 60-second conversation, we already see Luffy's defining trait and why he's one of the best main characters ever, his ability to inspire others just by being himself. And the last thing we see is Luffy fighting Alvida, and this was one of the biggest hooks for me early on. This was not an intense fight where the main character is fighting tooth and nail to beat this big villain like so many other shows and movies. There was no serious music or even any fear that Luffy would lose this. As soon as Alvida smacked him on the head with the club and he just smiled, you knew she was toast. The fight was fun, the music was exciting, and he's just mollywopping an entire crew with a smile on his face and smacks Alvida into the Bermuda Triangle. Also, at the moment of impact here, you're hit with this creative photo snapshot montage kind of thing before Alvida is blasted away. The way this show creatively changes its animation, coloring, or style like this to highlight impactful moments is something I really love about it. In literally just the first episode alone, Oda successfully gives us such a good insight into who Luffy will be. He's strong, he's charismatic, and he's determined. This arc also introduces
What separates Luffy from many other shonen protagonists is that he doesn't need to be convinced that oppression is wrong or that suffering matters. He already knows. And that knowledge turns him into a catalyst rather than a subject. Someone who enters broken lives and forces change simply by being himself. This is why One Piece anime backstories hit so hard. Because they aren't just sad histories meant to earn sympathy. They are carefully constructed explanations for why the world is the way it is, why characters are trapped, and why freedom feels impossible until Luffy shows up and treats it like a given rather than a reward. Characters like Nami, Robin, Law, Sanji, and countless others don't just suffer. They endure systems designed to erase their agency. And Oda takes his time showing that suffering in full, not to exploit it, but to make the audience feel the weight of what freedom actually costs. Luffy's greatness lies in the fact that he never tries to fix people by changing who they are. He fights to give them the space to choose for themselves. And that makes his actions feel revolutionary rather than heroic in the traditional sense. When Luffy declares war on the world for Robin, or places his hat on Nami's head, or punches a celestial dragon without hesitation, those moments land because the audience has lived inside the pain that made those moments necessary. And Luffy's response cuts through all complexity.
This is what I think is one of One Piece's greatest strengths, its use of backstories. The backstories are emotional and thoughtfully written in this show. They don't just show you what happened to characters in the past, They help provide so much context into what makes each character act the way they do. Luffy's childhood backstory, for example, does a great job at this. When we meet red-haired Shanks, an almost brotherly figure to Luffy growing up, he chooses peace in an altercation at the pub with some bandits. Luffy, however, sees this as cowardly and it makes him mad. We see a key example of Luffy's personality shine here when this anger takes over and he impulsively eats a devil fruit out of spite. The most interesting part of this backstory to me is when Shanks stops the sea monster from eating Luffy. He doesn't even fight it, he just kinda stares it down. I briefly thought Shanks must have devil fruit powers here, but that couldn't be it because he was also swimming. I don't know how he did that, but he did look cool doing it. This scene not only teased us with more questions about who Shanks is and what his powers are, but it began to tease the potential power of some pirates in this universe very early on. After saving Luffy and losing an arm, Shanks and his crew set off to sea. Luffy declares he'll become king of the pirates and surpass him one day, leading to one of the most iconic moments in the series. What I really loved about this backstory is just how clear Luffy's personality was being shaped by his experiences with Shanks, and
One Piece anime backstories are effective because they aren't isolated tragedies. They are interconnected reflections of a world built on exploitation, silence, and inherited cruelty, and Luffy's role is not to heal that world with speeches, but to shatter the structures that maintain it. What makes this even more powerful is that Luffy himself is not burdened by a tragic past in the same way as his crew, which allows him to function as an uncorrupted force, someone who hasn't internalized the world's cruelty and therefore refuses to accept it as normal. This dynamic flips the usual shonen formula, because instead of trauma creating the hero exposes trauma by refusing to coexist with it. Oda's genius lies in understanding that backstories matter most when they change the present. And in One Piece anime, every backstory directly informs a character's choices, fears, and limitations, making their eventual liberation feel earned rather than symbolic. The emotional weight of these stories is amplified by time, as Oda often introduces characters long before revealing their pasts, allowing audiences to form opinions that are later has deepening empathy rather than manipulating it. Luffy's consistency is what ties all of this together, because no matter how dark the story becomes, his reaction is always the same. If someone's freedom is stolen, he will fight. And that predictability becomes comforting rather than boring, a promise that the story will not betray its own heart. In a medium increasingly obsessed with moral ambiguity and anti-heroism, One Piece stands out by insisting that freedom, loyalty, and kindness are not naive ideals but necessary ones. And Luffy embodies that insistence without irony or apology. This is why One Piece endures across generations, because its backstories don't just make people cry, they remind viewers why those tears matter. And Luffy doesn't just win fights. He validates pain, restores dignity, and proves that sometimes the greatest hero is the one who never forgets what it means to care, making Monkey D. Luffy not just a great protagonist, but the emotional backbone of one of the most impactful stories ever told.